The KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Dodgers take a 4-game winning streak into the All-Star break. They're back in first place in the NL West for the first time since June 5th. They lead Arizona by a half game. Major League Baseball's All-Star game is Tuesday night in Seattle. Dodgers right fielder Mookie Betts is competing in today's home run derby. The competition begins at 5 p.m. The All-Star weekend actually kicked off on Friday in Seattle with the new Swingman Classic, an All-Star game for HBCU players. The Swingman Classic was created by Hall of Famer Ken Griffey Jr. 50 players from 28 HBCUs played in the Classic, which is designed to give more exposure for black college players who want to play in the major leagues. Griffey plans to make the Swingman Classic an annual event during All-Star Weekend. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
2 years ago, on Juneteenth 2021, KBLA Talk 1580 launched with a promise to give disenfranchised fellow citizens a voice in current political, economic, social, and cultural issues with an empowering, sustainable, and restorative language.
Everybody's gotta live the life under the sun, under the sun, under the sun.
As we enter our third year, we are delighted that KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerges as the talk station of choice for African American listeners. In a vigorous public opinion research study, the 2023 African American Media Issue Survey finds that for the second consecutive year, KBLA Talk 1580 remains the most trusted, credible, and reliable media source in Southern California for African Americans and beyond. Furthermore, 80% of those surveyed agree that outlets like KBLA Talk 1580 provide honest and authentic content about the issues most important to the black community directly from black journalists who understand the issues that need to be addressed. At KBLA Talk 1580, we remain committed to curating conversations that matter to you. Thank you for your continued support. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. The station that sounds like the city looks. The city looks.
Here it is, a groove slightly transformed. Just a bit of a break from the norm. Just a little something to break the monotony of all that hardcore dance that has gotten to be a little bit out of control. It's cool to dance, but what about a groove that soothes and moves romance? Give me a soft, subtle mix. And if it ain't broke, then don't try to fix it. And think of the summers of the past. Adjust the bass and let the alpine blast. Pop in my CD and let me run a rhyme and put your car on cruise and lay back, cause it's summertime.
Yeah, I guess it's that time. Summertime, and that's a nice track. Who wrote that? Who wrote that, Miles?
Rakim wrote it for Will.
Rakim wrote that for Will Smith. I didn't know that. But I love that track. And it's that time of the year, and so you'll be hearing that on radio stations all across America because we are in that season. And speaking of which, this Saturday in the summertime, July 15th, we'll be celebrating the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matter at the People's Justice Festival. Thousands of folk from all across the country descending on Los Angeles this weekend here in Leimert Park, literally adjacent to this studio this Saturday, the 15th, 12 to 6 p.m., performances, Children's Village, giveaways, speakers, including Cornel West, the Green Party presidential candidate, on stage at 4:30, Skillshare, vendors, healing justice space, a lot going on this Saturday in the summertime in Los Angeles as we celebrate the enduring legacy now, 10 years in the making of Black Lives Matter. Hard to believe it's been 10 years already. So check us out this Saturday. Dominique DePrima and yours truly will be the main stage host for a good part of the day. So it should be a great day this Saturday in Leimert Park as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matter. In this hour, I'm pleased to be joined by esteemed reporter and best-selling author Paul Kix, whose new book, You Have to Be Prepared to Die Before You Can Begin to Live, takes a deep dive into the intersection of history and social justice. Specifically, Kix uncovers the untold story behind one of the most iconic photographs in all of American history. You've seen this image countless times, no doubt. It is an image capturing a black teenager. Just close your eyes and you'll remember this photo. A black teenager, a policeman, and his German Shepherd lunging at this young brother during the turbulent days of May 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama, 60 years ago. Here now, 6 decades later, comes Paul Kix with a book, once again, called You Have to Be Prepared to Die Before You Can Begin to Live. And I'm pleased to welcome Paul Kix to this program. Paul, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Tavis.
It's my great delight to have you on, man. I want to start at the beginning. Surprise, surprise. And the beginning for me is how you became captured or haunted, you tell me, by this photo. We'll get into the photo itself as we move through this hour. But again, it's a photo that we've all seen countless times. Why so captivated by this photo, Paul Kix?
Well, so I'm a white guy. My wife Sonia is from inner city Houston. She's black. And by the time that our 3 kids were born, we have a daughter who's now 14 and twin boys who are now 12. Especially after the boys were born, Tavis, I wanted to really understand what it meant to be the head of a black household. Of course, our kids are biracial, but as Sonia will say, and I'm sure you know too, Tavis, they will identify as black because America will see them as black. Mm-hmm. And so as a result of that, I was like, okay, well, let me sort of do a deep dive into the black canon. And I'd read a fair bit in college, but really I went deep into the civil rights movement. And it was that photo that captivated me. Now, why did it captivate me? Well, because if that photo were taken, I became obsessed with that photo about 10 years ago, in 2013. If that photo were taken 50 years before the event in 1913, it would be indistinguishable from 1963, meaning that, like, nothing about, you could do it, the same sort of kid could have been lunged at by dogs. You know, perhaps there would have been lynchings, right? But 50 years after that spring of 1963, placing us in 2013, that was real progress, the sort of progress that could allow a guy like me to marry somebody like Sonia. And so the deeper I went into that photo, the deeper I went into those 10 weeks in 1963. And I really see that spring in 1963, 60 years ago, as the origin story of America. Because that was the time that America, after that spring, that's when America finally says, okay, let's reckon with what it means to be now truly equal. What does that mean? And everything that happens after that is a result of that question. Yeah, it's a question, as you well know, we're still reckoning and wrestling with. Very much so. We'll talk about that. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sorry, I cut you off, Paul. What were you about to say? I was just going to say, like, so that's the first part of it, but there's another reason why I wrote it. Okay. That's a far more recent photo, or far more recent image. So let's go now to 2020. You were saying just before the start of the Black Lives Matter movement being 10 years old. Now it's the summer of 2020, and now there's another image that's captivating America. And this time, it's Officer Derek Chauvin almost absent-mindedly grinding his knee into the back of George Floyd. And here's the thing, Tavis. That was deeply personal to my family. My wife, Sonia, grows up in inner city Houston. She grows up in 5th Ward. George Floyd grows up in the adjoining neighborhood, 3rd Ward. George and Sonia were the same age that summer, 46. Sonia had many friends and cousins who went to Yates High, where George went. In fact, one of Sonia's dearest cousins, Derek, he knew George back then, called him by his middle name Perry, which everybody in the neighborhood did, and remembered him as the tight end on the Yates football team that made it to the state championship game in 1992. So by the time of the summer of 2020, not only Sonia but my mother-in-law Connie, who is also from inner city Houston, she's living with us as well. And it's just like, my God, you know, what if that were Derek? And what if that were our boys? So that was the first time that we allowed our kids, the boys were then 9, to see these images, to see a black man being killed by law enforcement officials. It wasn't Trayvon, wasn't any of the other black men who had been killed, but it was George. And the boys in particular had a lot of questions about it. And that summer, there was a lot of despair, honestly. There was just like the kids lost their innocence because they began to realize that this is the black experience as well. And so when Jacob Blake is shot by Kenosha, Wisconsin cops 7 times in the back while his 3 kids scream from the car, he's shot, I think, about 6 weeks after George was suffocated. When Jacob Blake is shot, my son Walker saw that image too. And he rises from the room and he says, "Why do they keep trying to kill us?" And he runs from the room in tears, and his brother Marshall follows him. So Sonia and I were thinking, well, my gosh, what can we do to try to, support them, to give them a sense that to persevere, to have courage, to have hope. And that was when that image of George was coincided with that image from 60 years ago of Walter Gadsden. And I thought, that's the greatest story that America can ever tell itself. So I was like, I want to write that as a book, and I want to dedicate it to my kids so that perhaps they can have that sort of hope, that sort of courage, that sort of ingenuity, and that sort of perseverance.
And that is why Paul Kix is on this program in this hour. I didn't want to interrupt. He's laid the foundation quite nicely. I want to build on it when we come forward. He mentioned Trayvon Martin. We mentioned, since I referenced earlier, this Saturday, the 10th anniversary celebration of Black Lives Matter. Trayvon's mother, Sabrina Fulton, will be on stage with us. There'll be a lot of mothers of these brothers and sisters who've been murdered over the last 10 years. It's going to be a great day. It's going to be solemn in some respects. There'll be some tears, there'll be some joy, but there'll be a lot of folk on this stage, and Dominique and I are honored to be the host for most of the day, a good part of the day. But Sabrina Fulton, the mother of Trayvon Martin, will join us this Saturday, along with many others, as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matter. What we're celebrating this hour is the publication of the new book, You Have to Be Prepared to Die Before You Begin to Live. The author of that book is Paul Kix. When we come forward, we'll talk more about the backstory of that iconic photo capturing this black teenager, a policeman, and his lunging German Shepherd 60 years ago. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about. Good thing we've got 3 hours. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
You're listening to K-Drip, where we play all the best classic water-wasting hits like Sprinklers in the Rain and Leaky Faucets. They're tunes from another time because now that we face a hotter, drier future, every drop counts. Despite an extremely wet winter, keep using less water, fixing leaks, and reusing indoor water for your garden. Visit SaveOurWater.com for more ways to conserve. Up next, brushing your teeth with the water on. K-Drip.
At Lowe's, we're always bringing pros more ways to save. Right now, get up to 40% off select bathroom faucets and vanities. Plus, buy Southwire Romex Simple 12-gauge indoor wire at our everyday low price of $109. Head to your local Lowe's or visit us at Lowes.com for more deals you can't beat. Because Lowe's knows savings, Lowe's knows pros. Valid 7/6 through 7/12 while supplies last. Selection varies by location. U.S. only.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
Don't settle for bumps, ingrowns, and itch due to dry skin. Venus for Pubic Hair and Skin is here with the only razor and regimen specifically designed for your pubic area, featuring a razor with a patented irritation defense bar and skincare regimen that is dermatologist and gynecologist tested. Venus helps protect your pubic skin from shave irritation. Visit GilletteVenus.com to learn more about our full regimen of products.
If this were a Reese's TV ad, you'd be staring at a Reese's peanut butter cup. And sure, my voice is peanut buttery smooth, but still, you need to see the peanut butter cups, right? No? I can really just say Reese's and you'll go get some? Okay, Reese's. 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 Really working, actually. Reese's. Reese's. I'm on to something. Reese's. Reese's. Reese's.
Let's unpack a little bit more with Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues right now.
Our guest right now is Paul Kix, author of the new book, You Have to Be Prepared to Die Before You Can Begin to Live. He's laid a quite nice foundation, and I, as I said moments ago, want to try to build on that. Let me start with this, Paul. When you see the photo, again, we'll get to the backstory here in a second. But when you see that photo, again, which I've seen and this audience has seen thousands of times, when you see that photo, what do you see?
I see, first, quite literally, a dog feasting upon a kid, a black teenager. But what I see metaphorically is, to a certain extent, like this is a story of the black experience in America. You see the violence with which white people have sort of infringed upon black rights and black bodies. You see the dignity with which black people respond. The amazing thing about that photo, Tavis, and I think that, like, it's his serenity. Gadsden, in that moment when it's captured, his arms are at his side, right? He's almost opening up his right oblique to the German Shepherd, as if this image, even as it's happening, as if he knows that it's going to live on in some sense. You know, there's this eternal, almost, there's a sense of eternity to it. And I see in that image everything that has happened since. You know, my mother-in-law, she grew up in the Jim Crow South. And when Trayvon was killed, or even we were talking about before the break with George Floyd, you know, she was like, same old bleep, right? Same old crap. However, what I also see in that photo is progress. Because that photo is the linchpin for finally changing America in ways that, yes, the struggle continues, but the progress begins 60 years ago, and it begins with that photo.
We'll talk about your frame of this photo as the origin story of America, or at least forcing us to wrestle with the origin story of America. We'll talk about the progress you see in that photo. Before I do that, let me do this. You referenced him by name at this point, but again, because we're talking about this 60 years later, let me pass the mic to you. Take your time and tell me about the young man. Tell me what you learned about the young guy in that photo.
So his name is Walter Gadsden. He's 15 years old. He was one of the onlookers there that day. It's early May 1963, and Gadsden is going there to observe the protest that day. The protests that day were known as Double D Day. In some sense, this was almost the buildup of that entire spring. Everything that happened across Project Confrontation, which is what the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was calling it, otherwise known as the Birmingham campaign, right? Everything was in some sense building up to what they called D-Day and Double D-Day. And Gadsden is there as an onlooker to see what will happen. And what happens is Bull Connor and the Birmingham Police Department and Fire Department, they unleash the hoses, they unleash the dogs. And if I could just say a quick thing about this, because you made a good point. We've all seen this stuff. But I want to try to bring alive for your audience what that actually meant. Let's start with the hoses. The hoses disintegrated clothes off of kids that day. It cartwheeled them end over end, right? It could strip bark from trees or strip mortar from bricks. It could strip the bark from trees at a distance of more than 100 feet. It hit those kids, Tavis, at less than 30 feet. The things they described that day, and I had a chance to speak with the kids who were protesting all these years later, but what happened that day is it would run across your body. If it ran across your hairline, it would uproot your hair. Some kids said it was effectively scalping them. And then there were the dogs, and these dogs were terrible. There were 5 or 6 of them that were unleashed that day. And again, you think, oh, this Gadsden's being attacked, and he is, but he wasn't the only one. There was an 8-year-old boy who was caught, whose throat was caught by a German Shepherd, and the German Shepherds used him like a rag doll from side to side. Other dogs attacked other kids. There were war reporters there that day, Tavis, people who had been on the front lines in World War II or Korea. And some of them would later say, after Double D-Day, that nothing frightened them, nothing seared itself into their memory like Double D-Day in Birmingham, Alabama. So it's sort of like, yes, we've seen those images, but I'm asking us all, let's really look at them now. Let's really understand what the context was.
I want to interrogate this photo some more. You're giving us some good backstory, some great history, and I'm devouring it, as is the audience. Tell me more about Walter Gadsden. What happened to him after that photo? How long did he live? Is he still living? Tell me about the subject of the photo.
So here's the thing. To talk about Walter Gadsden is to sort of talk about the genius that was the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in that spring of 1963. Mm-hmm. And what they wanted to do, this will take just a second to set up. They were broke going into that spring of 1963. We think today that there was like almost this inevitability to the civil rights movement. No. Everything that King had done to that point had failed. Mm-hmm. He was ridiculed by not only the Southern press, but the Northern press. He was ridiculed by other civil rights groups.
That's right.
Like SNCC, as being ineffective, right? They go to Birmingham as sort of a last-ditch Hail Mary attempt to either break segregation or be broken by it, right? So what they're going to do, they say, well, we have the newest of media available, television at that time. Their thing was optics. We want to try to get to the point where not only America, but the two most influential Americans at that time, the two brothers sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, will see what we are doing, will see how we are suffering, and will do the thing that the Kennedy brothers swore they would never do while they were in office, which was author civil rights legislation. This was the biggest gamble of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference career. They went down there thinking outright that they might be killed for going to Birmingham. King even delivered mock eulogies just before they go down there. Mm-hmm. But they had to worry that if they lost in Birmingham, the SCLC would fail. They had an even larger concern that if they lost in Birmingham, the civil rights movement as a whole might fail. And so what did they rely on? They relied on optics. They relied on trying to tell. We talked about this in the last segment, right? Mm-hmm. The suffering is a metaphor for the black experience, right? That was one of the keys. They were like, if we can get to the point where we can get Bull Connor to act as we know he can, as he know he wants to, then what we can do is we can change America. If we can get those sort of images through like Walter Cronkite on the nightly news, if we can reach them that way, we might at last get them to see what we have known all our lives, what all of our forebears have known for all of theirs. Yeah. That was the goal of Project Confrontation. Yeah.
So tell me about Walter. What happened to Walter after that? Is he still living? That's the part I'm pressing about more about him. Yeah.
Yeah. So Walter. So he. Walter is somebody. He's that onlooker that day. Let's just stay in the moment.
Right.
Walter's an onlooker that day. The reason he's an onlooker, he's actually not nearly as progressive as King and the rest. In fact, he comes from a very conservative black family who had owned some newspapers in Atlanta that were very critical of King. Mm-hmm. And so here was the genius of the SCLC. We're talking about optics. All right, that oblique, that open side where the dog is feasting, that's true. But if you look really closely at that photo, what you'll see is Walter beginning to raise his left leg. And people who knew Walter would later say that he was around large dogs and knew how to react if one of them turned mean. Mm-hmm. So in the ongoing reality outside that frame, there are some people who said that he actually broke the German Shepherd's dog. Now, that's important because the SCLC, again, thinking of optics, they're like, well, we know this larger story, but guess what? We're going to put that image out there. We're going to talk about the brutality that Walter encountered, and we're going to have that be the story. Wyatt Walker, who was one of the keys of that campaign, executive director.
Wyatt T. Walker, yeah.
Wyatt T.
Sure.
Brilliant man.
Mm-hmm.
King said one of the keenest minds in the movement.
That's right.
Wyatt T. said, "I know that whole story," and he was laughing as he told this story. He's like, "Picture's worth 1,000 words, darling," and that's what he said about it afterwards, because he knew the power that image itself had, and if he left out the context from the reporters, as he did his best to do, that image would be the one that everybody went with. So to finish out on Mr. Gadsden.
Sure.
Mr. Gadsden died a few years ago, and he had a really complicated relationship with it, because to his dying day, he didn't necessarily agree with what happened that year in Birmingham. In fact, there were a lot of black Birminghamians that were vehemently against King and the rest coming down there in 1963. And we can get into why that is, but Walter was one of those people that was against it.
Yeah. They called Birmingham during that time Birmingham, as you well know. Never mind the fact that there were a number of black folk that didn't want King to come there. There are two things I want to get to. I'm watching my clock here. I got 2 minutes. We'll start into this and we'll continue as we come forward. Let me do this first though. JD, can you zoom in on this? For those who are watching on YouTube or checking us out on our app right now, I'm holding up this photo. It's a photo, again, we've all seen, but I'm holding this photo up so you can see the photo. Let me hold this and ask a question at the same time, see if I can do two things at once, like walking and chewing gum. I don't know. I'm holding the photo. Let me ask this question. You mentioned a moment ago there were folk in Birmingham, black folk, who didn't want King and his crew to come to Birmingham. Tell me why.
2 reasons. Number one, it was because they thought the problems of Birmingham should be solved by Birminghamians. They saw King as an interloper. And number 2, they thought that, well, if they decided to protest alongside King, he would do what he would do. The campaign would run, right, until King was either won or lost.
Right.
And then he would move on. But as a result of that, these people would be left with the repercussions. What was the biggest repercussion? Everybody in Birmingham at that time, everybody who was black in some sense worked for somebody who was white.
Yep.
And every single white boss was like, if you decide to protest as an adult, right, if the adults decide to protest, you're going to lose your job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. I should mention, just as an aside, I know this story well because I've known her for years and interviewed her any number of times. We've spent time together. Condoleezza Rice, of course, a Republican, worked in the Bush administration, former Secretary of State, lived in Birmingham during this time. And
she did.
And her family moved out. They moved to Denver. They moved out of Birmingham because they didn't want to be a part of this. And her father had some misgivings as well about Dr. King coming to Birmingham. But they moved Condi out of Birmingham to keep her out of this sort of space. As a matter of fact, Condi Rice was supposed to go to Sunday school on the Sunday that the 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed in Birmingham, where they killed those 4 little girls. One of those 4 little girls was a friend of Condi Rice, former Secretary of State. Condi was actually supposed to go to church with her that Sunday to visit that church. And Condi's parents told her at the last minute, you can't go today. We've got a special program at our church today. You can't go today. We'll let you go with her next Sunday. And that saved Condoleezza Rice from being in that basement when that bomb went off, sitting right next to her friend. I digress. These stories are always fascinating for me. When we come forward, more of our conversation with Paul Kix. I want to get to the story of Dr. King and the decision. Paul calls it courageous. There are a whole lot of folk who were, and he calls it genius, but a lot of folk mad at Dr. King for using those babies, putting those kids out in the street to be sicked on by these dogs. Paul's book is called You Have to Be Prepared to Die Before You Can Begin to Live. More with him when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Say the quiet part out loud. KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. A statewide ban on gender-affirming care for juveniles in Tennessee is going into effect. The law prohibiting hormone treatments and other therapies for transgender minors is moving forward following an appellate court decision over the weekend. Litigation filed by the ACLU that claims the law infringes on parental rights is still pending, meaning the rules could be blocked again. Authorities are investigating after thieves broke into the home of African-American Tina Knowles. She's the mother of Beyonce and Solange Knowles. The Los Angeles Police Department confirms her Hollywood home was robbed last Wednesday. TMZ reports the thieves made off with more than $1 million in cash and jewelry after stealing Knowles' entire safe. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Need an accident attorney by your side? All you got to do is call the accident guys.
Injured in a car accident or at work? The accident guys can come to you almost anywhere, so you don't have to come to us. Se habla español.
Is this the This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Dodgers take a 4-game winning streak into the All-Star break. They're back in first place in the NL West for the first time since June 5th. They lead Arizona by a half game. Major League Baseball's All-Star game is Tuesday night in Seattle. Dodgers right fielder Mookie Betts is competing in today's home run derby. The competition begins at 5 p.m. The All-Star weekend actually kicked off on Friday in Seattle with the new Swingman Classic, an All-Star game for HBCU players. The Swingman Classic was created by Hall of Famer Ken Griffey Jr. 50 players from 28 HBCUs played in the Classic, which is designed to give more exposure for black college players who want to play in the major leagues. Griffey plans to make the Swingman Classic an annual event during All-Star Weekend. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
JP Morgan Chase is building on the investments in California and around the country to help close the racial wealth gap and build a more equitable future. As part of JP Morgan Chase commitment, they are taking action to help improve financial wealth and access to banking in the Black community, helping more people open low-cost checking and savings accounts, hosting community seminars with supporting Black-led institutions by building awareness about financial investments, hiring community managers, and opening community center branches like Crenshaw, Inglewood, and downtown LA. Visit today, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity. Again, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity. Get the tools to help reach your financial goals. Visit today, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity. Again, jpmorganchase.com/racial equity.
You know that Big Bargain detergent jug is 85% water, right?
85% water? I thought I was getting a better deal because it's so big.
If you want a better clean, Tide Pods are only 12% water. The rest is pure, concentrated cleaning ingredients.
Ooh, pass me the intercom thingy.
Attention shoppers. If you want a real deal, try Tide Pods.
Don't pay for water. Pay for clean. If it's got to be clean, it's got to be Tide Pods.
Water content based on the leading bargain liquid detergent.
Did you know that feeling sluggish or weighed down could be signs that your digestive system isn't working at its best? But taking Metamucil every day can help. Metamucil supports your daily digestive health using a special plant-based fiber called psyllium. Psyllium works by forming a gel in your digestive system to trap and remove the waste that weighs you down. Metamucil's gelling action also helps to promote heart health and slows down sugar absorption to promote healthy blood sugar levels. Start feeling lighter and more energetic by taking Metamucil every day.
Are you looking to steer your career in a new direction? Driving for Culver City Bus can be your ticket to a long-lasting career with excellent benefits and paid training. Culver City Bus is looking for customer service and safety-minded bus operators to join the growing team. Culver City Bus offers on-the-job training starting at $19.10 per hour, uniform allowance, and health benefits. Culver City Bus is a great employer. Let Culver City Bus connect you with an essential service job. If you enjoy driving, seek real opportunities for career advancement, and passionate about making a difference in the community, then you are invited to join the Culver City Bus team. Start your journey today by submitting an application at culvercity.org/jobs. For more info, visit culvercitybus.com or call live customer service operators at 310-253-6500.
Have you heard about Lendistry? Lendistry is a national Black-led small business lender that is headquartered right here in LA. Once you've started your business, Lendistry provides flexible financing options starting at $50,000 to help you access the affordable capital needed to grow. Visit lendistry.com/KBLA to learn more.
We knew you'd stick around. This is LA's home for progressive talk radio. Welcome back to KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Tavis Smiley. We continue our conversation now with Paul Kix, author of the book You Have to Be Prepared to Die Before You Can Begin to Live. Paul, before the break, I said I wanted to get to this, and I will right quick now. This notion of Dr. King, and I think you're right. I don't disagree with you. I've written a book about Dr. King, and so I know this story rather well, as do you, given your research now. It was a brilliant move, brilliant stroke on the part of SCLC to get the visual that they needed. Television was just in its infancy, essentially, and these images, to your point, changed America. Changed America's thinking when they saw these black babies, as it were, with these hoses turned on them, these dogs sicked on them. It did, in fact, start a different conversation. We'll come to your notion again of the origin story of America being wrestled with in that moment for the first time in a very unique sort of way, in a way that slavery could not generate a conversation. So again, we'll talk about that in a moment. But there were people who were critical of Dr. King, though, and those in the movement for making a decision to use these babies in that way. Given that you've delved into this now and you studied this iconic photo of this young teenager being accosted by these dogs, do you have a particular take now on the genius, as it were, of SCLC using these babies?
Well, it's honestly something that I wrestle with to this very day, because on the one hand, the SCLC, we were saying just before the break, the SCLC, there were very few black adult Birminghamians who wanted to protest because they were fearful that they would lose their job if they did so. So James Bevel, who was another protagonist in the book and one of the key leaders in the movement of that in that era, he said, well, what if we use their kids? And everybody was like, what? Because Birmingham was a city, not only, you were saying a minute ago, where it was called Birmingham, but the Klan castrated black men as a means to intimidate King and the rest from carrying out civil rights acts or carrying out causes for civil rights justice, right? The police raped black women in their patrol cars. CBS's Edward R. Murrow, he goes down to Birmingham prior to King, and he says when he finishes the report, he turns to his producer and he says, I have not seen any place like this since Nazi Germany. Like, that was Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. So for James Bevel to then say, I think we should use kids, everybody in the SCLC was against it for the longest time.
Yeah.
But the reality was that Bevel did a great job training these kids. He had been a part of many civil rights campaigns dating back to his first one in Nashville in 1960s, part of the Nashville sit-ins, where they literally fumigated the place with insect repellent as they locked black protesters inside, and they nearly gagged on the poison, gagged to death. You know the first thing James Bevel said after the Nashville firefighters broke in? He says, let's go do more protests tomorrow. That was a sort of militancy that James Bevel had. So he was like, if this is for the movement, we're going to use whoever we can get.
Yeah.
And that was ultimately the rationale that won the day, because otherwise Birmingham would have been the biggest failure of King's career.
Yeah.
So by the hundreds and ultimately thousands, these kids agree, yes, I want to have this sort of freedom. They knew what they were running into. But still, like, how do I see it? Man, I see it as a parent. I see it as a parent of black kids myself. Yeah. Honestly, I still, to this day, have a hard time. What would have that been like? I'm almost getting emotional. My boys turned 12. My daughter just turned 14. Tavis, there were so many kids that age who said, I want to stand up for freedom that spring.
Yeah.
And they went out there.
No, there were kids who couldn't even pronounce freedom. They'd say freedom. I want freedom. They couldn't even pronounce it. But they were willing to put
willing to do it.
They were put their bodies on the line in that regard. I want to show this photo again for those who've just tuned in. We're talking with Paul Kix again. The book is called You Have to Be Prepared to Die Before You Can Begin to Live. And what he does in this book is unpack the story behind one of the most iconic photographs in American history. It's the image capturing a black teenager, a policeman, and his lunging German shepherd during the turbulent days of 1963, May specifically in Birmingham, as it was called, Alabama, Birmingham. We're talking about this photo 60 years ago and its relevance even today. The picture's on your screen. If you're watching us on YouTube or on our app, you can see the photo right now. We've all seen this photo, but if you're watching now, you can just tap into what we're dissecting in this hour. I believe in attribution. I'm so glad that this photo allowed the suffering of black people to no longer be rendered invisible. That's what happened. This picture means that the suffering of black people in the South will no longer be rendered invisible. But I believe in attribution. We talked about the subject, Mr. Gadsden, in the photo and his family connections. Talk to me about the photographer and what you know about the person who took this photo and the impact that it might have had on him, given what he saw.
So his name was Bill Hudson. He was a photographer for the Associated Press. He was a white guy. He spent a lot of time during the Civil Rights Movement going through the South. And he would later write about – Bill Hudson's dead now, but he would later write about it in a book. And he said it was one of those instances where – and anybody in your audience who's a photographer will kind of understand this, where it's like you're snapping photos all the time, right? And then there's something that just, boom, it pops. It pops right off the screen. Or back in those days, right, when you're in the dark room and you see the image come up, you're like, oh, wow. Because it's framed, just let's talk about aesthetically, right? It's framed perfectly, right? It captures Gadsden's right in the middle. You see, again, we talked about this in the last segment, you see this the almost serene way that Gadsden is holding his body, like he's giving himself to this German Shepherd and to posterity. You know, it's amazing what this image evokes. And Hudson would later say that it's arguably, he had to qualify it a little bit because he took so many photos during that era, but he said it is arguably the most important photo that I ever took. And he goes, certainly for what it did, he's like, that's the photo that will long outlast me. He knew, I think, almost in the moment that we talked about posterity, he knew almost in the moment that, like, this is something that's going to outlast him. In the same way that I think, because, like, there's so much stuff that happened that spring, Tavis, but, like, the letter from Birmingham jail, Wyatt T. Walker, we talked about in the last segment, King, those guys knew that letter was going to outlast them, too.
Yeah. Well, it worked. It worked remarkably well because it got the attention of the nation. It got the attention of those brothers who Paul Kix referenced earlier in Washington, John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert Kennedy. It got their attention, and it began what Paul has referred to as a conversation about the origin story of America. So when we come forward, we'll commence a conversation about the origin story of America and how how the conversation ensued. Once people saw these images, and these images, again, this is an Associated Press photo, it's an AP photo. You know how AP works. When AP puts a photo online, everybody gets it. So this photo ran in papers all around the country. It ran in papers all around the world. There were TV cameras out there. Again, Walter Cronkite, others are reporting on this on the evening news. It fundamentally changed the conversation in America about this origin story, as Paul Kix puts it. And we'll unpack that when we come forward in a moment on KBLA Talk 1580.
Be sure to like and follow Tavis Smiley at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues when we come forward.
She's so smooth. So I'm interrupting my own shower to remind you to treat your skin like the queen she is with Olay Hyaluronic Body Wash, packed with Olay's highest level of vitamin B3 complex. It's so moisturizing that it will give you visibly smoother, head-turning skin in just 14 days. People wondering, how'd she get so smooth? Olay Hyaluronic Body Wash. Also, try Olay Hyaluronic Body Lotion.
Hollywood Walk of Fame stars in 2024. Stay tuned to find out who's in next year's class. I'm Aisha Cairo with your K-Black Minute News. A new group of 31 entertainment professionals across film, television, radio, recording, and sports entertainment will have their names etched into Hollywood's history in 2024. One of the most celebrated names on the list was the beloved Chadwick Boseman. Others for the class of 2024 in Hollywood Walk of Fame was this year's Oscar winner Michelle Yeoh in the motion picture category. Other notable names include Chris Pine, Gwen Stefani, Andre, Dr. Dre, Young, Otis Redding, Christina Ricci, Brandy Norwood, Harry Washington, and more. The dates for the stars ceremonies have not yet been scheduled. To find out all 31 inductees, visit youtube.com/Walk of Fame.
Don't settle for bumps, ingrowns, and itch due to dry skin. Venus for Pubic Hair and Skin is here with the only razor and regimen specifically designed for your pubic area, featuring a razor with a patented irritation defense bar and skincare regimen that is dermatologist and gynecologist tested. Venus helps protect your pubic skin from shave irritation. Visit GilletteVenus.com to learn more about our full regimen of products.
I'm James Alexander, a proud member of AARP. 1967, I was 17. That spring, my friends the Barcades and I made Soulfinger. It was a hit. Number 3 on the charts. That summer, we became the Great Otis Redding's Band. First gig, the famed Apollo. That fall, we toured. That winter found me in a morgue identifying the bodies of my bandmates and Otis Redding. My music and their memories bring me joy. The Barcades forever.
What would you call a joy that is as solemn as it is sweet and knows no bounds? A joy that's beautifully rooted in soul and resilience. This is Black Joy, a joy that reflects pride and honor despite every challenge. AARP believes the power of Black joy is limitless, and we celebrate this joy supreme. Join us in celebrating Black joy at aarp.org/blackcommunity.
Heard any other talk radio lately that sounds anything like this? We didn't think so. You're listening to Unapologetically Progressive, KBLA Talk 1580.
All right, Paul Kix, there is a lot in this iconic photo when one looks at it, as I am right now here in the studio. You see a lot in the image. And yet there's a lot behind this image, and it kicked up a new kind of conversation, if you will, in this country about America's origin story. So tell me about that part, as we say.
So the Kennedy brothers were strongly against any sort of civil rights legislation. That's exactly what King wanted. This photo is published across the front page of the New York Times, and President Kennedy says it makes him, quote, sick. And they were worried at the time, the Kennedy administration, that the Soviets would use it as a piece of propaganda, and they did throughout the world, throughout the communist world. They said this is how Americans treat their own. And so for numerous reasons, political, yes, absolutely, but ultimately moral, it is the Kennedy brothers, and in particular Bobby, who is seen largely as like Jack's protector. Bobby's the one who begins to side with King, who begins to see things as King sees them. And so he ultimately argues to Jack that, I know we've said that we can never do this, but the only way to keep 100, 1,000 Birminghams from happening is to author civil rights legislation. And that photo and other images from that spring and summer were the reason for it. So in the summer of 1963, Jack Kennedy, on June 11th, he does a national address, and he says, I'm here tonight to say that the Kennedy administration and I'm going to be sponsoring civil rights legislation. And that civil rights legislation becomes the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And that's why I say that's really America's origin story, because it sure is not 1776. And I would also argue it's not 1863 with the Emancipation Proclamation, because of the 100 years of Jim Crow that follows and everything that was brutal about all of that. No, it's really 1963 when America finally, at last, begins to say, okay, what will happen if we actually try to treat each other equally? And in some sense, that question lingers today.
Yep. For you history buffs, you know that after Jack Kennedy, John F. Kennedy made that announcement, gave that national speech, not too long thereafter, he was murdered. Same year, of course, murdered in Dallas. And so he didn't get a chance to advance that legislation, but thankfully LBJ comes in behind him and gets the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act passed. So Kennedy made that speech. When he saw this photo, it made him sick, and he finally was moved to action at the encouragement, as you heard Paul say, of his brother Bobby. But he didn't live long enough to advance, really, the bill that he wanted to introduce. LBJ comes through and finishes the work. So that photo does its job. This, of course, and other photos, and the images on national news had the impact that the organizers, King and his SCLC movement, wanted that protest to have. When we come forward in our remaining moments with Paul Kix, we'll get to this other issue that he raised, that he sees in this photo, and that is progress. On the one hand, one could argue progress has been made. On the other hand, you heard him earlier in this conversation bookend this photograph with the photos, the live images of Derek Chauvin with his neck on his knee on the neck of George Floyd. So we'll do some comparing and some contrasting and get Paul to unpack what he means when he uses the word progress seen through his eyes, at least, in this iconic photo. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580 is an intervention. When we come forward, includes you. KBLA Talk 1580, turning pain into power.
It's our anniversary.
Every weekday during the month of June, we're giving away gear from the KBLA store to say
cancer
thank
can
you
be
for
pretty
your support.
scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
At Charmin, we heard you shouldn't talk about going to the bathroom in public, so we decided to sing about it.
Roll Charmin Ultra Strong when you drop in the beat. It cleans with way less effort on your seat. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Okay. Charmin flows extra strong from the road. Your butt hella clean while you're sitting on the bowl. Yeah, it's all you need for that bathroom groove. Get you in and out without nothing to prove.
Charmin Ultra Strong cleans better so you can use less. Enjoy the go with Charmin.
Want my secret for how to prep for summer getaways and get-togethers and get everything for less? Get to Kohl's. I just went and saved an extra 20% on sunny day essentials, like tees for my husband for $9.99, an adorable sport for my daughter, plus all the grilling tools we needed for a great barbecue. So get to Kohl's and save on cool finds for hot days. You'll thank me later. Select styles. 20% offer ends July 9. Some exclusions apply. See store or Kohl's.com for details.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 joins you in standing for voting rights. When We All Vote is a leading national nonpartisan initiative on a mission to change the culture around voting and to increase participation in each and every election by helping to close the race and age gap. Created by Michelle Obama, When We All Vote brings together individuals, institutions, brands, and organizations to register new voters across the country and advance civic education for the entire family and voters of every age to build an informed and engaged electorate for today and generations to come. When We All Vote empowers their supporters and volunteers to take action through voting, advocating for their rights, and holding their elected officials accountable. Please visit whenweallvote.org to stand up for your rights, voting rights. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Conversations that matter. You're listening to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
I want to do two things, Paul Kix, at least two things in the 5 minutes that we have left here. One, I want to compare and contrast this photo, this iconic photo of 60 years ago that you detail and unpack the story behind in your new book, You Have to Be Prepared to Die Before You Can Begin to Live. That's the name of the text. You have to be prepared to die before you can begin to live. That's the new book again from Paul Kix. In this conversation, you have referenced seeing in this photograph that we're looking at right now progress. So what progress do you see in this photo?
Well, you see, let's talk about it politically.
Sure.
And then we can move on to sort of the cultural impact of it. Politically, it's just as we were saying before the break. That photo leads to the sponsorship of civil rights legislation by the Kennedy administration. That sponsorship then becomes the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That leads to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That leads, in some measure, you could argue, to King's death in 1963, but also, I would argue, a new life for his country. And I would say it's not just Shirley Chisholm being allowed to run for president in 1972, and I would say it's not just the rise of the black middle and upper class about the latter half of the 20th century. And I would say, too, it's not just even Barack Obama's presidency in 2008, but I think it's felt on a far more granular level. That photo and that spring is really my ability as a white guy to marry my wife, Sonia, from a black woman from inner city Houston, in a former Jim Crow state like Texas, and for the two of us to raise our three kids today on a shaded street where nobody harasses us for who we are. What happened that spring makes my life possible today, and I'm so very grateful for it.
Let me put you on the spot. This is unfair, so I ask for forgiveness up front. Sometimes somebody once said it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. So let me just say, I'll put you on the spot right now. Can you imagine being in Birmingham? Of course, it would have been tough to be married to a black woman then as a white guy in Birmingham. But had you been there then, and had your kids been the age that they are now, the twins and your other child, would you and Sonia have allowed your kids to go in the streets?
It's a great question. We were part of the Black Lives Matter movement and the protest in the summer of 2020. And we actually, the first time we went out, we kept our kids from the protest because we didn't know, there's lots of crazy stuff like counter-protests,
sure,
cops roughing up people. The kids were young, but I tell you what, they were the same age as those kids from Birmingham. Mm-hmm. I would like to think that I would allow my kids to do what what they thought was right for them. But man, I'm also just like those long dead parents from Birmingham,
Yeah.
And it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough to try to figure out how I would have responded. Yeah.
Yep. And as we move toward, again, this week, the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matter, the 10th anniversary, believe it or not, of BLM is the 13th of this week. And again, this Saturday, in case you haven't heard, we'll be in full force. The KBLA Talk 1580 delegation will all be out this Saturday, joining with our colleague, Malina Abdullah, as we celebrate year 10 of Black Lives Matter at the People's Justice Festival in Leimert Park, adjacent to this station, all day this Saturday, 12 to 6 p.m. Dominique and I have the honor of being the main stage host. Cornel West, Dr. West, Green Party presidential candidate, will hit the stage for a major address at 4:30. A lot of great speakers, performances, a lot happening this Saturday. But as we celebrate the 10th anniversary, Paul, finally, of Black Lives Matter, your thoughts on this image from 60 years ago and what we still see more recently with George Floyd and Trayvon Martin and Breonna Taylor and if I had the time.
Ahmaud Arbery, you can go down the list,
sure,
right?
Sure.
Yep. So what I would say is, it never ends, right? Progress is never completed. You don't become, you are always becoming who you should be. I think the same is true of the nation. Mm-hmm. We don't become a great nation, we are always becoming it. And in the same way that King in his era was not impressed with the progress of his time, we should not be impressed with the progress of ours. We should acknowledge that we've come as far as we have, but that doesn't mean that we don't continue to fight for the sort of equality that we really want.
Yeah. What a rich conversation. I knew it would be great. It was even greater than my expectations, and I love that. I love when a plan comes together. His name is Paul Kix, spelled K-I-X, Paul Kix. He's the author of a new book called You Have to Be Prepared to Die Before You Can Begin to Live. If you enjoyed the conversation, I highly recommend you get a copy of the text. Once again, you have to be prepared to die before you can begin to live. The author is Paul Kix. Paul, good to have you on. All the best to you, my friend.
Thank you, Tavis. I really appreciate it.
Likewise. Stay strong. Hour 3 of Tavis Smiley after news, traffic, and sports on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
It's a Monday, July 10th. I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black